I've always been a careful motorcyclist. I bought a bike because the car's costs were more than I could afford, both the upfront and fuel costs. I don't particularly enjoy riding motorcycles. I hate it when it rains or snows. I've always just wished I could be under a roof and behind a functional windshield. I never go for joyrides or try to pick up girls with my bike. If I did, they'd probably run screaming from my 2006 Honda Dream 125cc. Seriously, it has a frickin' metal basket in the front. It's not sexy. At all. I never fail to wear a helmet. I use all the appropriate signals when I'm driving, and I'm careful. The small Ontario fishing town where I live just recently installed the town's first traffic signal, and some of the more established locals aren't quite used to it yet. I was going through this intersection and one of those more established locals didn't notice that their light was red, probably forgetting it was even there. People always describe traumatic experiences like they happen in slow motion. This one didn't. I didn't notice that anything had happened until I felt the crushing pain and even heard the crack in my right femur. I remember hitting the windshield, and the next moment I was on the ground screaming in unbearable agony in the red snow that surrounded me. I was rushed to the local health clinic where they nursed my wounds and stopped the bleeding the best they could, as they waited for a helicopter ambulance to take me to a more better equipped hospital in Toronto. When I finally arrived at the hospital, the whole thing was a blur of morphine and anesthesia. When it was all completed, the final count was 17. 17 broken bones, mind you. I won't bore you by listing them all, but only my right hand was functional, and both my legs were unusable, with multiple fractures in each bone. More importantly, I want to emphasize before I continue, I had suffered no concussions, nothing was cracked or broken. The only injury I had above my neck was a relatively small cut extending from my chin to my lip that only required 7 stitches. The helmet had done its job, it was totaled. And my head and cognitive functions were completely intact and uninjured. I stopped receiving visitors after about a week in the hospital. The trip from home to Toronto was too far for people to make. So I spent most of my time alone watching television or reading. I tried to chat with the nurses when they came by, but often they were busy or not interested. Their visits were becoming infrequent as I continued to heal. One of them was at least kind enough to bring me a bowl of oranges. I've always loved oranges. And an interesting orange peeler that I could even operate with one hand. The peeler wasn't one of those cheap orange plastic ones. It was elegant and stainless steel, the body shaped like a large conical apostrophe with a small shark fin for a blade. The blade was sharp and precise enough that I could rest the orange on the table and use my palm to keep the orange immobile while I peeled away the outer skin of the orange. Grasping the peeler between my index and middle fingers, steadied by my thumb. It was tedious work, but I didn't have anything better to do. It took hours, but I finished nearly half the bowl that first day. Later that night, past normal visiting hours, after my last routine visit from the nurse, I was startled awake when I heard the door handle jingle and slowly turn with a click, opening as the faint sounds from the lobby entered the room briefly and grew silent as the door shut and the lock clicked. There was a privacy curtain blocking my view of the door, so all I could do was listen and watch as the silhouette came closer to my bed. The footsteps were slow, uneven, and shuffling. Every other dragging footstep was punctuated by a loud thud echoing from the hard white tiles. The shuffle thud grew nearer and louder as thumping in my chest grew faster and almost deafening. The silhouette was right up against the curtain, the figure tall and emaciated, almost skeletal, holding a long object in his right hand that extended to the floor. The left hand, blotchy and aged, extended and curling each finger one at a time around the privacy curtain until it was grasped firmly. I heard the metallic scrape and saw the flurry of fabric as the curtain was drawn back to reveal the figure that stood behind it. Relief spread through me as I saw an old man leaning on his cane, dressed in doctor's whites. The red letters stitched in his coat revealed that he's from the anesthesiology department. His name wasn't listed underneath his department, as is customary, but I'd already noticed that many doctors' names weren't there. I'd imagine that each department keeps spares around just in case the personalized ones get dirty or forgotten at home. I was amazed that a man this old was still practicing medicine. He was unbelievably skinny and appeared brittle, like the slightest breeze might cause him to sway and then crack under the motion. The only hair he had left was his bushy white eyebrows, and the white hair that was sticking out of his ears and nostrils. The most remarkable thing about him was his skin. It was saggy and wrinkled like you would expect from someone his age. But he had age spots and marks like I'd never seen. It was blotchy all over, the shades changing from every few inches, like a quilt. There were even some places where he had ivory skin, and other places where it was completely black. Scattered about was every shade in between. He approached my bed with a couple more shuffles, and drew a chair closer to him with his cane, and sat down with a soft thud near my left side. He hadn't said anything, and he continued his silence as he looked at me. He looked at me in a way that no one had ever done before. It was like he was checking me out, but it was much more intense and longing. That's when the relief I had been feeling quickly dissipated, and my heart monitor started beeping wildly as he looked at my hair, my forehead, my eyes, my nose, scanning every inch of me until his eyes rested on my toes. A smile crept onto his lips that revealed his unnaturally white and abnormally pointed teeth, and he turned his face back toward the table where the oranges sat, and then back to my face before he finally spoke, his voice quiet and gravelly.
Your oranges look delicious. You would not mind if I had one, would you?
His last sentence did not end with the upward intonation of a question, but rather with the empathetic declaration of a command. He took one of the oranges off the table, and his eyes widened and positively gleamed as he saw the steel orange peeler. He picked it up lovingly and cradled it back and forth in his hands as his mouth widened slightly. His eyes sparkled like a child at Christmas. He smiled as he touched the thin blade to the orange and punctured the skin. A fine mist sprang out as the smell of citrus overwhelmed the previously pervading sterile and aesthetic smell. Amazingly, his hand adeptly cut the orange and made a perfect swirling design in the orange peel. I know it sounds odd, but it was almost like he was creating art as he was peeling it. It was beautiful, yet captivating. He finished and pulled off the peel in one large ribbon. He looked down in wonderment at the hand that held the peeler, and muttered to himself,
"Extraordinary,"
as he proceeded to throw the orange in the trash, leaving the peel dangling in his hand. And he leaned his head back, elevated his hand above himself, and dropped the edge of the orange skin ribbon into his open mouth, slowly letting the entire peel coil into his mouth, moaning with pleasure. As the last of it landed into his mouth, he began to chew, savoring each bite with closed eyes. Once he swallowed, his gaze returned to me, and he reached into his coat and pulled out a syringe. Before I could say anything or even press the button to call a nurse, he inserted the needle into the IV tube. I felt a coldness enter my arm where the IV entered. The cold quickly spread throughout my entire body, freezing it immediately. I could not move. I tried to scream, but my mouth wouldn't open. I tried to scream with my mouth closed, but my vocal cords didn't work. He withdrew the needle from the tube and tossed the syringe aside into the biochemical waste bin as he explained.
"I have injected you with a neurotoxin that I have specifically developed to induce temporary but complete paralysis. It also comes with the side benefit that you cannot talk or make any noise, but you should still see, hear, and feel everything that goes on. You simply just won't be able to react. It makes my work much easier."
He took a scalpel out of his coat pocket and examined it, looking at the blade before he nicked his thumb slightly, making it bleed. He looked at both the blood and the blade, seemingly repulsed, as he threw the scalpel where he had thrown the syringe. He picked up the orange peeler, and with a wide smile across his face, he started talking. First, I think, to himself, but then it turned into talking to me.
"Beautiful. This is absolutely beautiful. I don't know I've ever seen anything more exquisite. I don't know why I've been using a scalpel all these years. Such precision and such elegance. I'm excited to use this on you. It will be wonderful. Before I begin, I like to tell my patients about why I do what I do, so that you know that you're part of a good cause, that you are saving a life. Without this, I will fall apart and die. I must eat skin to live. Today, I must eat your skin to live."
Remember how I mentioned that people always describe traumatic experiences like they happen in slow motion? This was one of those. He grabbed the orange peeler from off my belly button and lifted it up into the air, and he buried the small blade into my abdomen. Silent screams filled my head as the pain overwhelmed me. He dragged the peeler around in elaborate designs all around my stomach, using the belly button as a central point but never touching it. His expression was one of concentration, creative, abandon and insanity, like a sadistic Van Gogh. After he finished his design, he returned the blade to the point of origin and set the peeler down. Between his untrimmed yellow fingernails, he gripped the end of the peeled skin and lifted it. He lifted as high as he could, and I saw more and more of my skin being lifted from my body. He still hadn't reached the end of the skin ribbon when he tilted his head back and began to savagely drop the end into his open mouth, his tongue licking the bloody side as it came down. He did this until there was no more skin left above his head, only this skin remaining on my belly. He licked his fingers, skin still protruding from his mouth, and then he began to suck. He sucked the skin into his mouth and chewed the whole time as he brought more in. Each centimeter of skin entered between his lips, blood splattering around his face and onto the floor, like experimental linguine. The trial of skin finally ended, and the last inch entered his mouth with a slurp. He let out another one of his satisfied moans, and he licked his fingers again. He looked at my face, his eyes and cheeks wet from tears, and said,
"Oh, thank you. That's much better."
He looked back down at the orange peeler.
"You wouldn't mind if I keep this, would you?"
Again, it wasn't a question. It was a command. He picked it up and balanced it on top of his cane. He tore some medical tape from a cast on my arm and used it to lash the peeler onto the cane, like a crowning jewel on top of a scepter. He smiled again once he finished. He stood up slowly and shuffled and thudded to the door. He unlocked and opened it. I heard the quiet sounds from the lobby, and then they disappeared as the door closed behind him. They found me early in the morning once I was finally able to move and push the button to call the nurse. They moved me into the psych ward, talking about PTSD. They told me that there was no old man, that the wounds were self-inflicted. I know they weren't. I wore a helmet. I was careful.